Hello, everyone, and welcome to Real Talk. I'm Barbara Layton, and this is my co-host, Jim Frechos. We are so happy to be here with our next guest. And we love doing the show so much because we get to spend time with extraordinary people. We get to know them on a much more intimate level and then share them with you. So let's get inspired for the next few minutes as I introduce our next guest, Steve Long. Just very briefly, he has a long resume. Former Vice President of Collections Education at the Lower East Side Tenement Museum, former President of a Children's Museum on the East End, which is, as you know, a great hub for kids and families. And as of, I think, November 2021, Steve?
Yep.
Steve became the Executive Director of the East Hampton Historical Society, located on Main Street, East Hampton. So Steve, quickly, take your time. What influenced you most in getting where you are today? And tell us, what is the importance of a historical society in a community?
Well, I guess to take the last question first,
Yeah,
I think history roots us. It gives us a sense of who we are and where we came from. And that's what I've been so excited about learning East Hampton's history, because it's given me a sense of being part of this community. And I'm, as Jeanette Rattray would have said in her book, I'm from away, but by knowing our history, it makes me feel closer and gives me a sense of place.
Where are you from? From away. Where is from?
From away,
Are you from?
I grew up in Pennsylvania,
Pennsylvania.
and I've always been interested in history. I love the stories about the past that they're true stories. They actually happened. They're based on documentation, and I think how cool is that we have these sagas, epics in our own even personal histories that make such great stories. And so I love sharing those stories with the community, and especially East Hampton's history, because no matter what aspect of American history, if it's the indigenous peoples, if it's the American Revolution, the Civil War, the Industrial Revolution, you name it, you can learn about it right here in East Hampton.
was there a particular person in your life, Steve, that influenced you to be so interested in history?
Well, I mean,
Or were you just born like that?
I don't know. Well, my parents, we were always museum goers. I remember, I grew up near Philadelphia, and we went to it was called the Academy of Science, I think, back then, and seeing the dinosaurs and thinking that, it's prehistory, but thinking that there were these almost monsters that had roamed the earth millions and millions of years ago, and how that was sort of part of connected to our history today. That inspired me. To your question about an individual, when I was first in museums, I worked at the Lower East Side Tenement Museum, as you mentioned, and the director there was, at the time, Ruth Abrams. She was the founder of the museum, and so inspiring about what museums could do, that museums could help inform the issues that we're dealing with today. I mean, that was so much of what she taught us, that if you looked at American history, there were potential solutions for what we were trying to deal with in our contemporary everyday life. And I thought, what an exciting, history is not musty and old, it's very relevant and contemporary.
For our audience, tell us a little about that tenement museum and what Miss Abrams did. It's a recreation of what? Yeah.
So tenement building, for people who don't know,
Yes.
it is essentially an apartment building, but an apartment building for low-income people, for working-class people. The tenements, what we call purpose-built tenements, really started to be constructed around the middle of the 19th century. And in New York City, they were overwhelmingly the homes of immigrant people. And they also were the typical housing that New Yorkers had. 75% of New Yorkers at the turn of the 20th century lived in tenement buildings. And what Ruth's what was so special about what she did is she was able to lead an organization that learned the real stories of people who had actually walked those halls and lived in those apartments. And we were able to learn about those families and then recreate, based on a whole sort of host of different kinds of sources, what those apartments might have looked like.
From the Jewish experience, correct?
Jewish
Or
experience,
both, or a number of
Irish
those.
experience, Italian experience.
But the Lower East Side there was basically a Jewish enclave, wasn't it?
It is originally the Lower East Side
Originally,
was the first immigrant group to arrive there in large numbers was Germans. And then it transitions in the late 19th and early 20th century into a largely Jewish community from Eastern Europe, but though some Sephardim.
Yes.
And but despite that, there's still different kinds of nationalities that sort of populate all of the buildings throughout New York. And 97 Orchard Street, which was the tenement building that was restored and interpreted by the museum, it had a dozen different nationalities represented at
Yeah,
one
I've
time
been
or
there.
another.
It's absolutely extraordinary. I
It
highly
is.
recommend it for anyone who hasn't been there.
Agreed. One of my favorite museums,
Yeah.
but not my top anymore.
Which is, or can you say?
Well, I would say, what we're doing at the Historical Society in East Hampton is just that there's, to have Mulford Farm as an example. I love Mulford Farm. It's the center of East Hampton, and it has such an important story to tell about the American Revolution. Long Island has typically been marginalized when it comes to the story of the American Revolution. We lost the Battle of Long Island, and then British occupied the island, and essentially in histories of the Revolution, we're kind of passed by. We hear about Concord and Lexington and Saratoga
Or New
and Valley
England.
Forge.
Upstate,
But here,
Pennsylvania.
nobody talks about it. And even, the bicentennial.
Why not? Why not?
I think because we lost the battle. I think if
So
if,
history becomes the narrative of those who win,
that's
can be. Unless you rectify that.
that's the
or-
old saw that history is written by the winners. And
Exactly right.
unless we start to kind of dig a little bit deeper,
Right.
and we even though the British occupied East Hampton, this community was still as involved in the fight for freedom the same way that the people of Lexington and Concord were. They were successful at Lexington and Concord. George Washington retreated when he was in Brooklyn. So
That's
Well, it gets complicated, right? But there were also people that were pro-England during the revolution. I mean, that's all.
absolutely, yeah.
So how does the historian begin to pick and choose? We met the first time
Yep.
when we were talking about the Plain Sight Project.
Yep.
You bringing in a very different narrative that hasn't been really portrayed here in East Hampton.
No,
So tell us about that.
And so one of the things that I find so fascinating about Mulford Farm is that David Mulford, who is the head of the household in the 1770s, living in the house that we have preserved and we interpret to the public, he was the leader, really one of the leaders, perhaps, of the Patriot cause in East Hampton. He was the colonel of the 2nd Colonial Regiment. So all of the soldiers in East Hampton and Bridgehampton and Southampton reported to him. He had almost 800 troops under his command. And in addition to being the leader of the Patriot cause, he is East Hampton's largest slaveholder. And it's such an interesting question that the historian Edmund Morgan raised 50 years ago. He called it the American paradox. Why is it that the leaders of the Patriot cause, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, James Madison, are also among the largest supporters of American slavery. And it's fascinating how the sort of in our founding, the two almost go hand in hand. And I think it's a story that has been ignored typically. Certainly I did not learn about slavery in the Northeast. I don't know if you all
Right,
know.
right.
Until
It
David
was,
Rattray, right,
Right.
with the Plain Sight Project.
and so the
I respect you so much as a human being, as a historian, to try to give us a fuller picture. And that isn't history, that process of doing that.
I think it's
A part of that.
well, absolutely. It's a way to help us understand. I mean, I think history is a way for us to understand the present. How did we wind up here?
Right.
And by looking at the past, we're able to answer that question. And as I said, the past can be a reservoir of possibilities for the present. There's ideas and answers to problems that people have come up with in the past that are very much possible for us. Well, hey, maybe we should try that solution out. It was, we came up with that 50 years ago, or 100 or 150 years ago. So
History completely informs us how to move forward in the in the present.
yeah.
So very important. I wanted to ask you also, are there any other significant historical events or figures in the East Hampton narrative that you wanted to let the audience be aware of?
Oh, we need a longer
we
program,
need
but
much longer.
I'll give you
Maybe
I'll give you one or two.
Yeah.
What I mean, the Dominies. There's a family of craftsmen here in East Hampton who are preeminent woodworkers and clockmakers, and they really between about 1764 or so to about 1850, they are really making everything from cradles to coffins for this community, and they're also making clocks and fine furniture really regionally. They have 3 generations that are these great woodworkers, and what I find so fascinating about the story is that it was recognized how wonderful their work was in the 20th century. And their house was sold to Oscar Brill, who had Brill's store where the East Hampton florist is today, and Judson Bannister. This is in about 1940-41. He said, "We have home sweet home. We need to acquire the Dominies property." And it was for sale for $6,000 in December of 1942. Or I'm sorry, 1941. Well, December 1941, as you can imagine, some other stuff was going on. The community never got the energy to purchase this building, and it was dismantled. And the 2 shops where most of the work was being done, the woodworking shop and the clock shop, were saved. And they were saved down on Further Lane. Fast forward after the decades, I mean, you probably remember North Main Street, there was the parking lot behind the Community Services building, came all the way up to the roadway.
Right.
Well, that is where the Domini shops was originally located.
Right.
So the village owned that property, and those 2 shops had been saved and were donated back to the village. What serendipity. And before the house had been torn down, the Historic American Building Survey came to East Hampton and took measurements of the building, even the house that had been dismantled. So Bob Hefner spearheaded this project and reconstructed the house on the exact location where it had been.
Terrific.
And we were able to put back the original clock shop and the original woodworking shop exactly where they had been 250 years ago. And just that we now have the physical manifestation of the work that the Dominies had been doing, because we have so much of their clocks and their furniture. We really never had a really ideal place to display it,
And
and
you have-
now we do.
You have other
Wow.
facilities, right? That come under your purview.
So we have at the
Maritime.
Historical Society, we have the Marine Museum in
Marine Museum,
Amagansett.
Yeah.
Barbara, you had mentioned East Hampton Village, but let's not forget Amagansett. We
Sure.
also have the Moran Studio. I mentioned the
Which is
Mulford
amazing,
Farm.
yeah.
We have the Domini Shops and Clinton Academy, and right next to it, Townhouse and Hook Schoolhouse, which are also just really terrific buildings to visit.
This is fascinating. We do need an hour with you. Seriously, thank you, Steve. Steve, presently, what are the biggest challenges you face with preservation within the context of modern development right now?
Mm.
Oh, that's another, we have a
I
whole
know,
series,
I
that's a
know, but
topic.
I
But
know.
I mean, I would say that, if we could educate our community about, I think what makes East Hampton special is its historical character. I mean, there are so many beach communities,
Mhm.
but they do not have the historic architecture that we have, and not just the colonial architecture. I mean, even the sort of mid-century modern architecture. I mean, it is just absolutely phenomenal. And I think if we could uh, educate our community more about what is so special, that historical character, I hope that as we are, you know, rebuilding, or we're deciding what to do with a property that we purchase, that we're mindful of that. We're mindful of that, you know, the people who have been stewarding
Mhm.
these buildings and this land generations before us. That's where I would say our challenges. And then, you know, for us as an organization, um, we're looking to build a new collection storage center. Now, you might think, doesn't sound very exciting, but we
What is
have
that?
under our purview East Hampton's cultural heritage, nearly 20,000 artifacts, everything from sinks to scythes. I mean, if you can imagine it, we have it in our collection. And we are needing a state-of-the-art center where we can put all of these objects under one roof and take good care of them.
That would be amazing.
And this is a project that was first proposed by one of my predecessors, Chris Belson, the director of the Historical Society in 1980.
Wow.
So
That's
40 plus years ago.
still talking about it.
We're still talking about it.
That's-
So
Are
we are
moved? Where
finally,
we move?
so we have a permit, and we are going to be soon breaking ground, and it'll be, the center will be on Mulford Farm, and it will replace an unheated, unair-conditioned storage barn that we have been using since 1976.
But how valuable for everyone to be able to see that and witness that,
Yeah.
especially the students in the schools. I mean, it would be amazing.
Yeah.
You know, talk about bridging the gap between present and past and informing, you know?
And the stories those objects can tell.
Exactly, exactly.
I mean, it just, like, we have one of East Hampton's earliest telephones. You know, we have, I was mentioning David Mulford, we have his red wool coat that he wore in the 1770s. We have objects that we had a collections consultant and curator come take a look at our objects, and she said, you know, there are so many pieces here that any museum in the nation would give its eye teeth to get these objects and have them in their collection. So we need to take good care of them.
That's wanted and needed more than ever right now. More than ever, really.
And the funding would come from where now?
So for this new center, we've got
Private.
funding from
City to
the
town?
board, 100% participation from the Historical Society's board. We got, with the help of Tony Palumbo and Fred Thiel, a grant from New York State to help fund it. But, you know, we're always looking for, you know, to kind of, we have a little bit to go to really get this project 100% finished. So still doing some fundraising.
And we've got to get this finished before your time, your tenure is gone here, because
Oh, it'll be
you're
gone.
still a young guy,
It'll
but
be
but
it'll be done before.
we don't want
the-
another 45 years of this, right?
It'll be done. We have lots of other projects
Good.
after that. So
We need that to
absolutely.
inform us on how to move forward, really. Any other upcoming projects that you want to share with us, Steve?
Just coming up in the near future. So Hugh King, our town and village historian,
Yeah.
is a treasure.
Yeah.
And Hugh is on October 19th leading a Goody Garlic tour. His wife, who's unfortunately passed away not too long ago, Loretta Orion, wrote a great book about the one witchcraft trial in East Hampton. And so we are going to be talking about that whole saga on a walking tour that'll start at the Gardner Mill Cottage, where the Gardners lived, and then we'll visit the cemetery, and we'll go to all the sites associated with this. So October 19th.
Okay, and the public will find out about it.
Yep, on our website, easthamptonhistory.org, we have that. And then what I should also mention, even before that, we have Maritime Heritage. We're doing a book talk with Bill Blyer in collaboration with the Amagansett Life Saving Station Museum at Bookhampton. They're hosting us for a talk about Long Island and the sea, a maritime history, which is a whole other story. We didn't even get a chance to talk about East Hampton's relationship with the sea, but next time.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing, really.
As I hear you talk, and your first experience there in Philadelphia with the museum, and when you saw the dinosaur, it's a New York kid, and I don't know, Barbara too is a New York kid.
Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn, okay.
Oh, yeah.
We were all going to the New York Natural History Museum
Mhm.
where we saw our dinosaurs. It stays with us. Any plans on getting the high school kids, required, or they got to see this stuff?
Well,
Well,
we
have you reached out to the-
project comes into being,
Yep.
that'll
Right,
be
once
amazing.
it obviously.
Well, and we have, through the Gardner Foundation,
Mhm.
we receive funding for a Gardner Scholar. And so we're going to be having a high school student
Great.
this fall working with us to do a project. And Jim, you're absolutely right.
Have the
There's
classes in.
there's
Yeah.
all there's all
History
kinds of
classes.
opportunities for no matter what the student is interested in.
Mm-hmm.
There is a project at the East Hampton Historical Society that will be perfect for what they would like to do. But
History of the sports teams.
the
It's endless, isn't it?
absolutely, and to your question about the school groups, we are getting so many school visits.
That's great.
East Hampton School District, we have a great relationship with them. For example, students from John Marshall, where my kids go.
It's wonderful.
They are visiting all of our historic sites. Our Director of Education, who's amazing, Stacy Myers, is going into the classroom. We've been working with Springs and Montauk and Amagansett and
It inspires to these young people what's possible, especially in these uncertain times. So important, really. I think it's wonderful.
And a sense of pride, and again, gives them a sense of structure of who they really are, where they come from, in the sense as you put it.
and I mean, that was the
Crucial.
thing with the Tenement Museum. There was a woman who was an immigrant in a ESL program that we were running, an English program, and she said, what was so important to me about learning about the past on the Lower East Side is I realized I'm not alone. I came from the Dominican Republic, and I thought nobody else was doing what I had done. And I learned about the history of this community and how everybody I look around, they all did the same thing I'm going through now. And I think, especially with our school community today, for them to feel rooted in this community
Absolutely.
by learning through the past.
How important that is at this moment. What keeps you optimistic and grounded during these chaotic and uncertain times?
Oh,
You can share.
well, I mentioned that my kids both go to John Marshall, and
How old are they, Steve?
so 8 and 10, and the 10-year-old loves anything related to the past. He loves learning about East Hampton, past and present, and just that enthusiasm, and seeing that in our uh, the school groups that I've had, the opportunity to observe, and sometimes I get to co-teach. Um, Seeing that excitement and that interest and those inquiring minds really gives me optimism that we're going to make through it. Whatever we're dealing with, we're going to make through. And that's what I think is most heartening to me.
And as you inspire them, they in turn inspire you.
Oh, absolutely. I just, one of my favorite things with the job is when I have the opportunity to teach school kids, because you ask them a question, and grown-ups, they're all sort of reserved, they don't want to participate. Kids, they ask you the craziest questions. I love them, like just anything that comes to their mind. And so often it's a really great question. And being able to kind of have that give and take, it's a blast. You guys should come and see some of our school
Absolutely.
programs.
And to follow up on what Barbara was just saying, we've been through such rough times as a community, as a country. As you're saying, the American Revolution, slavery, we can do this.
Yeah.
We've done that. We're still incomplete, but it gives us hope that we can go forward.
Yeah, that's the thing that I is so wonderful about the past, is that it makes us realize we're not finished yet.
Mhm.
There's more to do. We have a future ahead of us, and I
Absolutely.
think that without an understanding of the past, that knowledge about the future, it's limited.
Gives us hope.
Hmm.
So thank you so very much
Oh,
for
no,
giving us
thank you. It's
so
such a
much
pleasure.
hope and information here. Thank you.
Thank you for
It's wonderful,
inspiring us.
Oh, and as I said, please,
Really.
come, we will have to have you come and see those kids. They are just delightful.
And let's continue to inspire one another at this moment in time. Critical. Thank you all. Thank you, Steve. Fabulous.
Oh, my
Thank
pleasure.
so
Thank
very
you
much.
both.
Thank you.
Real talk. See you next time.